How is everyone doing? Strength Chat episode 76, and today I have got a very special guest for you. The last time I spoke to this guy was in November last year. I think it was for episode 44. Today I am joined by the president and co-founder of the Strength Guys, Jason Tremblay. How are you?
Thanks for having me. Dave's just getting started here in North America, but I appreciate the chance to hop on with you.
Absolutely. I remember the first chat that we had. Really enjoyed it. Quite an insight into the work you do yourself, and obviously that's you can see that on the success that your lifters have had on the platform, which is really good to see. So since the last time we spoke, how have you been doing? What have you been up to? What's happened since we last spoke?
Well, I've been good. I've been busy. Aside from a few positive changes in my personal life, we're now 3.5 weeks out from the World Championships in powerlifting. TSG has a team of 9. We have 3 lifters who are in contention for a gold medal.
Nice.
So nominated either first or second. And yeah, it's a super exciting year. It's the first year, in spite of having worked with 2 Canadian national champions before, it's the first year that I'll actually get to be able to pop on my Team Canada jacket and help a Canadian athlete out, Teresa Parsons. So I'm super excited for that. And I've also just recently started a internship position with the Calgary Flames NHL team.
Nice.
We were the best team in the Western Conference this past season in the NHL. And it's a very well put together staff and well accomplished staff and well educated staff. And I'm honored that they've decided to bring me on, and that they've also given me a really cool data science project related to kind of organizing and fine-tuning where I can how the sports science operations goes on the back end.
Yeah.
So that's been a lot of fun working on that, in addition to preparing for powerlifting worlds and finishing up school and all that.
Nice. Oh, sounds like there's a lot of exciting things going on. With was it the Calgary Flames you said?
Yep.
Yeah. How did that come about then? Did you approach them for the internship? Did they approach you? Was getting into ice hockey a plan that you always had, or how did that come about?
So as of last year, I had one more internship to do for my undergraduate degree in physical education. And as of now, I only have one more semester. So by the end of 2019, I'll be officially graduated. And it's taken way too damn long. Like, I think 4 different graduating classes have finished before me that started after I did, just because running TSG and going through school and my own personal goals and all that, like you just can't do it in 4 years. So I applied last year and I didn't get the spot. And so I did my last internship at Ryan Smith's gym, and Ryan Smith is now a coach for the Strength Guys. So I did that at his gym, and I kind of got an email out of the blue from the assistant strength coach, Alan Selby, this year, saying, hey, you want to come down to the Saddle Dome, which is kind of the iconic building where the Calgary Flames play here in the city, and come in for an interview this Friday. And I said, sure, I don't need anything for school, but I'd love to, because growing up here in Canada, I think you're exposed to a fair amount of hockey. And although I was never much of a hockey player, I like playing street hockey and all that. I was a great fan of the game growing up. So yeah, it's like a Canadian kid's dream with an NHL team.
You can you can see the excitement on your face for it, which is good. It's nice to see, that it doesn't matter what type of coaching it is. When it's a new challenge, you can get excited to get involved in something like that.
realistically, there's so much to be learned from these other areas to like, um, for what we do in powerlifting. And I think these other areas can maybe take some of what we do in powerlifting and apply it there as well. But certainly it's just a wealth of knowledge that is only going to help our team more, which I'm very happy about.
Yeah, 100% agree. I think it is good. I think different sports, different training modalities can learn a lot from each other. They might not always cross over, and you might not be able to carry everything across. But I like to think of. I can't remember who said it. The base of knowledge is like a base of a pyramid. You want a nice broad knowledge, and then you can start getting a little bit more specific. The more you go up. So since we last spoke, they obviously managed to get the podcast on iTunes now. So there's a wider audience to reach. I would like to think so. The content and the information that's provided by the guests can reach a wider audience. Do you just want to give a little bit of a background, just how you got to create the Strength Guys?
So I created the Strength Guys after. So I have a prior university education in personal fitness training. It's actually the same program which Bryce Krawczyk of Calgary Barbell has graduated from as well. He was in the year after me, so we never went to school together. It's great little certification. It was 3 full-time semesters of university. You take your ANP1, ANP2, XPhys, strength training, and all these courses that are essential to the kinesiology degree, just minus some of the fluff. Like I didn't have to take computers. I didn't have to take World War II history, even though I love talking about World War II history. It was just kind of straight to the point, whereas an undergraduate degree is more general. I did that. And then with our co-founder, Anthony Walker, we decided that we both wanted to do something in the future, whether that was to start up a gym or just do something. Yeah. And so we mutually decided, well, let's start up a Twitter page, and we just need a name for it. Like, what are we going to call ourselves? And Anthony suggested the Strength Guys. So it was kind of born out of that. The plan from the get-go was that the Strength Guys was going to be a way of networking while we completed our degrees. Because for me, like, the biggest fear I had was that I would, spend all this money that was in my education funds and work so hard to get a degree, and then I would end up on the same wall as people who did a weekend certification, and having to fight for clients with them.
Yeah.
And so our way of trying to avoid that from the get-go was networking. And so I tweeted every single day, rain or shine. And we got some really good clients out of the get-go. Leanna Carr was one of our first clients. Vin Mangione, who owns an awesome gym in Upper New York called Kenmore Barbell, was one of our second or third clients. Jeff Nippard was like our 5th client. And then started working in professional motorsports shortly thereafter when a legendary NASCAR driver, Mark Martin, signed up. And then about a year later, one of our best bodybuilders in the company spotted Taylor Atwood pressing 365 at the gym, said, hey, you'd probably be pretty good at powerlifting. I think my coach does some of that. You ever tried it? And Taylor hadn't even had a clue what powerlifting was because he was in a transitionary phase of his life as well, coming away from professional football where Taylor was a professional running back. Like, a lot of people are amazed at like what he does, but I'm like, yeah, like, he's an elite professional athlete doing powerlifting, right? Like, this is what's going to happen as more of those people start to cross over as well. And so Taylor signed on. We won our first national title, even though I didn't quite know the rules of powerlifting back then. we didn't realize how hard it was to become a USA national champion. And we've won 5 years in a row now. Shortly thereafter, collaborated with Ben Esgro, who was with De Novo Consulting at the time. Ben was kind of, I think, the top powerlifting coach then. And I think even though he prefers not to be outgoing about it, I think he is now. He was working with people like Lane Norton, LS McLean, Ryan Doris, basically the entire 93 kilo podium, minus Jesse Norris. So Ben and I hit it off. I'd say like a year later, our group had grown a lot, and I was traveling the world with one of our employees at the time, Kristen Dunsmore, and we had some bad luck go our way when we were in Thailand. Decided, hey, like, I know these guys from Singapore always comment on our page, and it's only like 60 minutes away. Like, do you want to check it out? Cheap flight. So booked that in. Ended up in Singapore that night, and they actually came to meet us at the airport. This group of guys out of Elevate Barbell Club, and brought us back to the gym that night. And I met 3 athletes who would become future Asian champions. So Jonathan Shua, who works for our group now, Marcus Yap, who won the Asian Championship in Best Lifter last year, and I think, the one that's ended up being the craziest journey for us together and apart was Clinton Lee. I met Clinton Lee before he'd ever done a international powerlifting meet. We trained together. I was his coach for his first Asian Championship. Clinton won that, and he was shocked. He's like, over the moon happy about it. We prepared for our first Worlds together, where he placed a close 4th, and he got a silver on squat. And he was an 83 back then. And if any of our listeners follow powerlifting at the world level, you'll know now that Taylor's first in the 74 and Clinton Lee is second in the 74. So it's kind of crazy how some bad luck in Thailand led to me meeting all these guys and growing our team in Asia. And I think what all of this has culminated in is that we have a very international team. We have 9 athletes from 6 different countries, and we have athletes on 6 different continents around the globe. I think we're closing in on 40 total countries right now. So, we're proud of that wherever you go, maybe you're not so far away from, a powerlifting gym and a TSG athlete who trains there, and you can go and have fun and feel amongst friends. So that's kind of like our community.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great to see, having followed the strength guys, to see how you've grown, year on year. And I completely agree about the community side of things. I know whenever I'm, traveling around the UK, that I can, like you say, pop into a powerlifting gym, and it's surrounding yourself with like-minded people. And a lot of people, especially people first getting into powerlifting or strength training, think that it's going to be a load of people shouting and screaming and being a little bit unfriendly. Yes, there is shouting and screaming at some stages, but when you first go in, everyone's wanting everyone to lift heavier, be better. It is a good community to be a part of. When we last spoke, obviously we covered the Shifting the Curve program, and we also covered the level of detail that you go into in what you're tracking with the athletes that you work with. One thing that sometimes I think people, I don't think necessarily not overlook, but sometimes don't fully understand, is fatigue and how to manage that auto-regulation. Obviously, a lot of people use the RPE. I know I've been using it for a while now, and I'm just starting to get into, looking the videos back and how it's feeling. It's getting a little bit more accurate, but sometimes it can be a little bit skewed for some people. So just before we dive into this topic, do you just want to explain to everyone listening what what fatigue actually is. What is fatigue when people are training?
Yeah. So when you do easy training sessions, if you have a good base of fitness, the next day you should be good to perform again, right? And when you do hard training sessions, even if you have a good base of fitness, the next day or the next few days, or if you've strung together many hard training sessions on purpose, then you may be affected for a week or a few weeks where you're kind of feeling a little bit cruddy. Uh, Fatigue is a very it's not like a specific set of symptoms, and I don't think it should be treated as such, because an athlete who is fatigued can still be strong, right? So what I prefer to approach this conversation with is from a practical perspective in what we're really looking for. Um, when an athlete is fatigued, generally there's going to be more of a breakdown in their technique, right? So when you have that, the injury risk for the athlete may increase. So what we've built our monitoring processes here at the Strength Guys off of are detecting these changes, whether they're technical, whether they're in the athlete's lifestyle, or whether they're in the barbell velocity and how things are moving, and to be able to make a decision and act on that to hopefully prevent anything bad from happening. So that's what we do. And if you have questions in one of those areas, because I know barbell velocity was one of the topics here for the episode, I'll let you kind of probe further.
Yeah. So obviously, well, you mentioned there that there are no exact symptoms that you are looking for, and I think sometimes what's the right word? A coach working with an athlete, how they see fatigue is going to be a little bit different to how the athlete sees, because they're the one that actually is doing the training. So from a coach's point of view, what would you be looking for to see signs of fatigue? You've obviously mentioned the breakdown in technique and that sort of stuff, but sometimes it could be how they come across in the because I know as an online coach, it might be how they word things, and you might be able to see that's not how they're usually doing it. And then what do you usually find that the athlete mentions when they start feeling fatigued?
Right. So we're looking at 3 to 4 different quadrants, and the first quadrant in our, I guess, evaluation of an athlete's fatigue is external workload. External workload being the amount of volume that they're doing. And as we talked about, and I encourage, because I think the principles of shifting the curve are so valuable. So if there's listeners who haven't listened to our first episode, I highly, highly, highly recommend going back and listening to that. But we use some landmarks which are maybe a bit novel and unique to us in how we look at and how we prescribe training volume. There's a lot of talk about a bottom-up approach in powerlifting right now. Mike T. Van Usgro and I have actually gone out for lunch together in Columbus at the Arnold Classic, and we talked about this. But I think if you were to look at how we're prescribing the main lifts, once we get to know someone, it's almost flipping that upside down. It's a top-down approach where we're looking at, okay, so in the preparatory phase, this athlete has done 35,000 pounds of squat volume, and that was the most they had ever done previously. Let's race to 40,000 pounds to prepare them and shift their curve up, right? So you're giving them progressive overload on a macrocycle level. Yeah. And then let's base the rest of our prep off of that. So for some athletes, they may need to hit peak volume or near peak volume, 4 to 3 weeks out from the competition. For others, they may only need to be at 50% of peak volume for the competition phase, and then they'll taper off of that. So from achieving peak volume in a preparatory phase, which is where we're increasing load tolerance and building the fitness for lifting, we then use that as a landmark to prescribe the rest of the experiment, so to speak. And I feel that's a great advantage for us because we can quantify exactly what we're doing, and we can discuss as a staff what's worked, what hasn't, and we can move forward with an exact set of numbers which could be applied in an individual way to anybody else, right? So we're looking at external workload, and in particular, we're looking at a few things. Number one, when we're doing our analysis of volume, is how many weeks we've gone without a deload. Number two is we're looking at how close we are to peak volume, or if we are at peak volume. A few things that we've heard from athlete feedback when an athlete is strung together many weeks, maybe below peak volume, but you're, at least 80% of it. Or if you achieve peak volume, is it doesn't feel very good to do the most amount of work you've ever done in your life. So we'll usually get complaints of like, that moves slow, which I'll talk about in our next quadrant, or, I feel cruddy, or we may see some asymmetry in their technique begin to arise. So lateral shifting, rotation, maybe a subtle loss in posture, maybe in a squat, for example, the knees are drifting back posteriorly more than when the athlete is fresh and maximally powerful. And so these are the things that we commonly see. That's not an emergency for us because especially in the competition phase, which is really we want to overreach you a little bit in the competition phase because we want you to be over prepared for the demands of a meet. So when you think about it, in powerlifting, you have to do 3 sets of 1 on every lift at a meet, and you have to warm up for that, which is pretty chill. We're at least doing double that, 8 days out from the competition and 15 days out from the competition and 22 days out from the competition. We're doing at least 6 sets of 1 with most athletes. So they're very, very well prepared for the meet from a capacity perspective, and also to be able to execute their opening and second attempts.
Yeah.
And when you're doing that many, that many work sets and 3 to 4 hour long workouts, you're training like a serious athlete, and you're going to get tired after. So for us, it's not an emergency. That's why we have the taper in the final week. And because we structured our model this way, we reliably see, unless the athlete is cutting weight, a peak effect. Like our athlete gets better on meet day compared to 8 days out or 15 days out. And so that's an example of when fatigue is purposeful. It's not like an emergency. An example of like when fatigue is not purposeful is when you are not looking for fatigue to happen and training just starts to go into the gutter. And that's more of when you need a monitoring process. So our first quadrant is external workload, and to summarize, we're just looking at how close the athlete is to peak weekly volume, and then how long they've gone without a deload or taper.
Yeah.
The second quadrant we're looking at is technical. So as I covered there, generally there's correlation between athlete workload and asymmetry that we viewed. So this may be lateral shifting, knee collapse in the squat, rotation, loss of posture, or a loss of mean concentric velocity, which is the primary metrics that's used in bar speed or velocity-based training. So an athlete can still be strong through a loss of velocity, but when there's a loss of velocity, that loss of power is the first indicator that fatigue is starting to creep in, that the athlete's not entirely fresh. So if it's on purpose, and if you're in the competition phase, we could be like, you need to get this work done, because we want to see you do your opener and second attempts under the worst conditions. Like, that to us is very important. If it's a loss of velocity and we don't want it, we may look back at external workload and say, we'll ask two different questions. Sometimes it's fatigue and sometimes it's not enough training, right? So we'll ask the question of, has our training approach been adequate? Like, is it possible that this athlete is detraining? Because there's such a thing as like prescribing a program that's so underwhelming or not challenging that the athlete won't progress or regress.
Oh, yeah.
Or vice versa. Have we been doing too much? Do we need to taper and get on with the show in the next block? So we'll make a decision right away off of that. Now, the third question we may ask is, well, is the problem the program or is the problem the athlete? So this is where we go into quadrant 3. We do a daily readiness survey for our athletes that asks them about their sleep, their stress levels, their energy levels, their soreness, and their hydration. And obviously, if an athlete has slept 3 to 4 hours the night before an important lift and things are slow, you can't prove it scientifically, but the problem is likely on their end, right? That you're not fresh, and obviously you're not going to have power that day. But if everything checks out in the athlete survey and there's still an issue, then you can go back to that question of, have we done enough, or do we need to taper and kind of start with the next block? And the final quadrant is we're looking at pure outright performance. So we track performance in a historical record. This is something that's done in professional sports and strength and conditioning, sports science. You got to know your personal bests, right? And you got to know what body weight you were at when you did them, whether the sun was shining or it was rainy out, be detailed in your records. And usually when we make that assessment that, okay, it's time to taper, we will do an assessment at the end of the taper. And based on that assessment, we will hopefully adjust their 1 rep max up because they got better. But it's an equally important and sometimes more important adjustment when you have to adjust their 1 rep max down and then communicate the expectations to the athlete. Because one of the big mistakes that you can make in powerlifting is to let the train of expectations just get going with way too much speed. Because then it just all comes crashing down on you on meet day when it doesn't go as you expected it to. So, I mean, knowing when to increase the projection and when to lower it are equally important in a monitoring process. So that was a lot of talking, but that is our system for monitoring people.
I think what I like picking up on that, there is a lot more detail that goes into it. That what I found interesting that you said there is that sometimes fatigue is needed to be in a fatigue state is what you're after. When it's not planned, that's when things start going wrong sometimes. And as well, I think it's again sometimes often overlooked is managing lifters' expectations and not thinking that it's all going to be plain sailing, especially depending on body weight. And when you mentioned in there about sleep and all that sort of stuff, you have to have everything in place to think, right, what is actually the what is going on here in terms of fatigue. You mentioned also there about sometimes, if a lifter has had 3 or 4 hours sleep, and obviously then their training session isn't very good, the onus is on the lifter a little bit. How much have you found sort of forgetting about the bar velocity for a little bit and the sort of technique and that sort of stuff? how much have you found mindset to play a big role in actually fatigue? Because sometimes, for example, myself, I've got the All England's next weekend. And at this stage, I am pretty tired. So I do know that I have to get the work done. It is a mindset of, right, make sure I get plenty of sleep and then go into it. And then actually looking back at the lifts, it's actually like, actually it felt horrible, but actually it moved pretty well. How much have you found the mindset to play a role in fatigue?
So I think the week before a competition is a delicate stage. I think that the coach or coaches need to do a lot of deciding behind the scenes on objectively how things are looking. And I think that the athlete needs to stay out of that process as much as possible. I think there are certain scenarios. I have two clients recently where this comes to mind. Teresa Parsons here in Canada and Laura Estrella in the Dominican Republic, where we just had to have a talk about these are incredibly strong women, but we had to have a talk about maximizing intent under the barbell because, part of power is how much force you can produce and how fast. But the other part is you've got to actually flip the switch and use all that, right? And I think some fatigue and barbell slowness and stuff like that, depending on your lifter, it can actually be more of a psychology change that's needed than a physiological change, because they may be incredibly strong athletes already. So sometimes you need to touch on that and just say like, hey, like, what are you doing? If you're a week out from competition and you're dragging butt, like I know before the Arnold, Rob Ali was sick. He missed his second attempt on squat, got stapled with it, and we watched the video and we told him, Rob, like, it looks like you gave up like halfway through the lift. Like, that wasn't actually that hard of a single for you. So it got under his skin. It pissed him off. The next day he went in, he did all of the sets with the second attempt just fine. So sometimes you've got to be able to trigger the athlete and motivate them or light the fire within or get them to focus on the right things, producing the max amount of intent. Because sometimes it's not fatigue, sometimes it's something else.
Yeah, absolutely. I think sometimes it does come down to how much you want it, and you've got to have that, like say, flip that switch and have that fire to be able to do it. And I think sometimes what is a lot of people will, a lot of lifters will want to express how they feel to the coach, which is absolutely fine. But I sometimes feel as though as a coach myself, they're training with you because they want that part of they want the training side of things to be taken control of. I know we spoke before. You can only control the things as a lifter. You can only control the things that you can control. Like, you mentioned there about your hydration, your sleep, and that sort of stuff. And as well, your mindset, you can control that. Obviously, sometimes it doesn't always go like that. So obviously, you mentioned there about as coaches actually tracking and making sure that the amount of volume that can be taken care of by them. In terms of getting to a point where how long you might not have gone without a deload, what are your strategies that you found that have worked quite well in terms of getting the athlete recovered and getting their fatigue levels down, as well as how to implement deloads?
So it's when it's not like in the competition phase. In order to get fatigue levels back down is a pretty simple adjustment for us, honestly. We take the penultimate week of loading in the block. We color code our blocks. So we have a gold intro microcycle or week, a yellow build microcycle, which is like the transition. So if it helps our listeners to think about it, imagine an intro week of being super easy training. So the RPE of the sets, and we use a percentage-based approach, but I'm speaking about RPE as reps in reserve. Theoretically, is going to be within 4 to 6. Okay, so this is very easy training, designed for you to get your legs under you and build into the block. For a build week, we're looking at about a 6 to 7 RPE. And then for an attacker or a recovery week, which is our green week, our taper week, we're looking at an RPE 8, maybe in competition an RPE 9 of work sets. So the hardest loading. And after the penultimate week of loading, we will half that volume by 50%. Usually we'll do some sort of assessment on the final day after the athlete has performed their work sets on the exercise. If performance was great, we'll increase their 1 rep maxes, and depending on how much time is left in the block, we may transition them out of that recovery period. So it may be like a build week after that, where it's still not back to like high loading, but you're working your way back up. Or, if there's nothing really to fight for at that time, we may taper them again for the following week, just to make sure that they're fresh and ready to go when we start training back up. If they did not get better, then we have to make a decision. Usually that starts with adjusting the 1 rep maxes down and going back to training if the athlete is healthy. But if they're absolutely crushed, maybe there's a lifestyle event going on outside of training, again, we can decide to taper again, where we just literally repeat the week. But if you look in the literature on tapering, it's basically just cut the volume in half, keep the intensity high. So I think a key part of that is not overthinking that.
Yeah. I find it quite interesting there. You mentioned there about altering the what your actual 1 rep maxes are. I know for a lot of people it will be right. These are my 1 rep maxes that you got into competition, because obviously under competition is going to be a little bit different to how heavy you are going to lift in the gym. And I think sometimes people always look at their 1 rep maxes on the platform and don't think that they can be adjusted. If you're feeling tired, they're obviously going to drop down. If body weight changes, that's going to drop down. So yeah, I find that quite interesting. And the more I'm developing as a powerlifting coach, and trying to add a little bit more detail into how I work with the lifters that I work with, is something that needs to be looked at a little bit more, I think, which I do find interesting.
Yeah, I don't think that you can expect the peak of your gym performance on the platform, and we never train that way. Like, I think that you can have success with a highly systematized approach to powerlifting based on perceptions of effort. I think Mike T is the one who's done that. But for us, we don't want to let our athletes loose. When our athletes go off program, and we've had many talks about this, so if he's listening, I love you, Rob. But like one of our 83 kilo athletes, Rob Ali, like, my God, like the guy's pulled 725 pounds off program on deadlift. He's squatted the world record, 675 pounds off program. He's done some really insane shit off program. But the body weight's higher. The circumstances are on the day where he felt like doing it. And that doesn't always transfer to the competition. I was talking with another one of our lifters, Sean Moser, who's 2-time Arnold Classic champion. I think, and this makes me a little bit sad, I think it's just because he's not on social media, that he's not in the conversation as one of the best 93s in the world, because he's beat the world champion at the last two Arnold Classics. Sean's no scrub, but Sean and I are also friends, and we like to talk about golf and hockey and all that kind of stuff. And I shot him a text when I left the driving range yesterday. I'm like, man, I was stroking every single ball, and he sent me a text back saying it never translates. And it's kind of like that, right? Like you could do shit on the driving range, but doing it on the course when it counts is a little bit different. And my golf game and scores definitely attest to that. So I think powerlifters can learn from the game of golf a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I quite like that. Like that analogy. 100%. That's the same for me. I am probably the worst golfer ever. A couple of lads that I used to play, a couple of friends that I used to play rugby with. One of them actually dropped out, and they always go up for a golfing trip up in Edinburgh in Scotland. And they actually invited me, and I had to say, no, I would be. Whoever gets partnered with me, they would not have fun that day. I'm not.
Practice can be going well, and you could still get in your own way, or hitting off an uneven lie, or hitting out of the trees because you hit an errant shot. Like all that shit can put you in a different place than you are on the range. So, and powerlifting's the same way.
Yeah, absolutely. We touched on it a little bit, and obviously you mentioned setting up the podcast, sent over the topics that I had in mind, and you touched on it a couple of times of bar velocity, and I've seen recently that quite a lot of lifters are using bar velocity devices. I know you can get apps on your phone, or you can actually get a device for it. What's your thoughts on it? Is it something that people should use more? What are the benefits of it?
So currently there is a lack of accessibility for these linear position transducers, is what they're called, devices that measure how fast the barbell's moving. Squats and Science was the previous maker of the open barbell unit, and they're transitioning to a new company called Rep One Barbell. So they're coming out with a new unit, but it's not out yet. Only one of our athletes has it. That's Taylor Atwood. But with that said, and I can't disclose everything that we're looking at, I could also speak about in professional ice hockey, the force plate monitoring that is done, and visually just what I see when I watch a lifter. Here at the Strength Guys, we will watch videos very, very often of our lifters, even if they're technically the most sound in the world. Like, I don't think I've told Taylor anything about technique aside from like a subtle reminder here or there. I don't think I've given him any like formative, like you need to do this to get better technical advice in at least 3 years. But we still watch his videos every single training session, because you can see, even if you don't have the device on the barbell, which in Taylor's case it does, I'm just using the example of a long-term client who's technically proficient, you can see when something moves slower or when something moves faster. And as I said, when something's moving slower consistently, that could be a sign that fatigue is starting to creep on, that power output is diminished. And then you have to have the other sectors of your monitoring process, external workload, readiness, and also performance on the test in place to diagnose what that problem is and make an action on it. So we'll look at that. I do think that more data is better, in professional sports. And again, I don't want to get into the specific metrics, but, power output and metrics associated with power output are important for performance, right? We want that to go up, not down. And if it's going down and it's not the time where it should be going down, there's a problem that needs to be acted upon. It's the same way in powerlifting. bar speed, or mean concentric velocity, the average velocity at which the barbell moved through the entire concentric phase, is regarded as the best marker for that in powerlifting. Um, and if you have a device that measures it, fantastic. And if you don't, pay attention and do video analysis, because something's better than nothing.
Yeah, I think that is a really good point. That I try and get a lot of the lifters that I work with to record their lifts, and just to have a look back. I know there's a lot of bit. I can't remember the name of the app. I actually downloaded it to have a go to see how it is. And sometimes it's a little bit. You've got to put the dot on the center of the bar, and it's not very accurate. It's one of those things that people see that other people might use, or they see big sports teams using them, and it's a little bit like, well, they've got X amount of budget to use, whereas people that or depending what level they're on, they've just got to use what the video feedback.
Yeah, to add to that, velocity-based training isn't just about monitoring. Like, you can keep a record of the fastest that this weight has ever moved. Like, we had an athlete squat 250 kilos at 0.5 meters per second, and we're like, hey, now, okay, like this athlete has gotten a lot better, right? So sometimes it could be used as an assessment in that regard, right? If you have good historical records. And I think a way that you can analyze that is looking at z-scores. You can calculate z-scores to say, we were significantly above the mean of performance here. Like, this athlete has gotten a lot better. If you're above a 1 in a z-score, I'm like, progress has been made. And if you're below a 1, I'd say, okay, this is maybe an issue. So if you really want to go down the rabbit hole, you could look at z-scores related to the mean and standard deviation of the mean, and then what's just been done. But yeah, so these are the kind of decisions that we'll make based off velocity-based training. There are other types of velocity-based training, or VBT for short, that you can do, such as training at a certain weight for a certain number of reps until you are no longer within this range of bar speed. So that would be a way of auto-regulating your approach.
Yeah.
We don't favor that because it doesn't afford us the opportunity to manage athlete loads ahead of time. And if you don't manage athlete loads ahead of time, in my opinion, I think it could already be too late by the time it's done. So that's why we follow a percentage-based approach. It gives us planned loads. It allows us to do an analysis on the athlete's program, and we can monitor from there. And then the other way that you could use VBT training is to predict the 1 rep max. So you can perform a linear regression, starting with 30% of the 1 rep max, and you can warm them up 45%, 60%, 72.5%, 82.5%, 90, 95, and even 100 if you want to check your linear regression. And you could tell the athlete, I want you to move this single as fast as you can on every single one of those warm-up sets and work sets. And that'll give you a natural regression, which comes from the force velocity curve, which is obviously a principle in exercise physiology, that an athlete is going to hit failure before 0% of their muscle shortening velocity is reached, right? Before that maximal isometric happens. So to back up a step from that, humans are stronger at lowering weights than we are at lifting them. Mm-hmm. And humans are stronger at attempting to lift a weight that's not moving anywhere than we are at lifting a weight that moves somewhere. Yeah. So to give you an analogy, Taylor will fail at around 0.18 meters per second of a mean concentric velocity on a back squat. In the literature, the slowest, which in general, the point of failure is 0.30 meters per second of mean concentric velocity in a back squat. So if we were to, like, Taylor is not going to compete a squat at 0.05 meters per second mean concentric velocity. Like, that thing would be barely moving. And chances are it would just become an isometric. He would miss the lift.
Yep.
So what you're doing with this linear regression is that you're finding the threshold, the MVT. I forgot the exact wording for it, but it's referred to as the MVT as an abbreviation. The minimum velocity threshold, that's it.
Yeah.
Where this is the slowest which a lifter can move the weight through the concentric phase and successfully complete the lift. And you're performing a linear regression, and you are using that threshold to calculate the intersect point. Yeah. And the intersect point is the 1 rep max. So it's not a deadly accurate way of assessing the 1 rep max, but it is another assessment tool which you can use. Yeah. And hopefully that formula gets fine-tuned as the years go on and it does become an accurate way. Because if so, that would open up the possibility in powerlifting that you could give an athlete a standardized warm-up protocol and they could perform it to the best of their abilities, and that would calculate their 1 rep max for the training session for the day accurately and reliably, and they would train off of that. So then you could follow a percentage-based approach where you can manage loads ahead of time, but it's adjusting based on their performance for the day. So that would be like a utopian dream about how we can program.
Yeah, when you're saying that, it's like another assessment to use. I think sometimes people will look at the sports teams or people that have these devices and look there, it'll actually make it a little bit better. But why I wanted to chat to you about it is that exactly as you say, it still needs a little bit refining and fine tuning and made to be a little bit better. Sometimes using all the the best technology, if you like, it is just another assessment. It can be used, but you've got to be able to interpret that information. So yeah, I think that was very well explained, because a couple of people have mentioned about the apps that you use or seeing lifters that use that. So massively enjoyed the chat from the first time I spoke to you. I've still followed the content that you're putting out there. Really enjoyed the chat today. I hope everyone enjoyed me catching up with Jason. So was talking about fatigue, bar velocity, and tracking everything in the background for fatigue. From everything that we've chatted today and for everyone listening, what would be your take-home points or words of wisdom?
I think that as powerlifting goes on and as the standard for what it takes to coach a world champion increases into the improbable, like a few years ago, being a world champion is a phenomenal accomplishment. And now if you're going to step into the limelight and you're going to beat, whoever the 93 kilo champion is this year, whoever the 74 kilo champion, the 83 kilo champion is, or on the women's side, 63 kilo champion. Like previously, Jen Thompson was untouchable, and now we've got challengers to that, which is, Jen Thompson is a legend and a trailblazer, and that's insane to me. That the field has caught up. As the field continues to grow, the standard of what it takes to develop athletes to that level is also going to grow. I hope that I don't think enough respect is given to the profession of being a powerlifting coach. I hope that our work and bringing concepts from professional sports and doing things in as professional of a manner can do a small part, along with people like Mike T and Matt Gary, to raise the bar for the profession and what it means to be a powerlifting coach. There's so much going on, and I don't mean this in a passive-aggressive way, but you've got to have a university education in this, and because you've got to understand, there's a ton of shit that you need to know, theory, just to start making these decisions. And then beyond that, you've got to have experience, but I mean experience in the practical way of coaching people. So if you're a young coach, intern with the best coaches that you can find, and start coaching athletes for a low fee. Get your feet wet, learn what works, learn what doesn't work, track everything, and work relentlessly on what you do. And if you're a lifter, I would just urge you to look at what the coach that you're considering, or the coach that you're using, or the coaches who are popular. Look what they're doing critically, and know that there are some big changes on the horizon in powerlifting, with bringing more of a professional level component to the sport. And I hope it raises the standard, honestly, because it makes me sad when someone with no education, but with a lot of popularity, is, kind of stealing the limelight of coaching. And I'm like, you absolutely should not be. This is not your education. The results don't stack up with those of the best coaches in the world. And you wouldn't, go to a mechanic who had a degree in, I'm trying to think of something completely irrelevant, environmental sciences to fix your car, right? Like, so why are we doing this as athletes? So be better with the decision-making process, and I hope that the entire community is aware of the innovations that are going on behind the scenes, because things are really going to start to change in powerlifting.
Yeah. Completely agree, and I think that's a really, really good point to finish on. Like I said before, massively enjoyed chatting with you the first time. Massively enjoyed catching up and chatting to you again. For everyone listening who might have any questions or want to see the content that the Strength Guy, you and the Strength Guys put out there, or possibly even get involved in some coaching, where can people find you?
Our website is thestrengthguys.com, and our Instagram is Strength Guys. You can find us on Facebook, The Strength Guys, Twitter, The Strength Guys, all pretty straightforward. If you want to follow me personally, even though I hardly post, Jason TSG on Instagram is where you can do that. And I really appreciate your time, and appreciate you having me on. I feel like we touched on some topics which will hopefully add value to the lives of listeners. And, if anyone who listened wants me to further expand on something, just send me a DM on Instagram to Jason TSG, and I'll happily do my best to expand on that for you.
No worries at all. Thanks a lot for taking the time to chat with me. I appreciate the time that people take to speak with me, and I completely agree with what you've said there. The whole point of the podcast and why I set it up is to provide greater content and information for everyone listening, and to steer them in the right direction of what they should be thinking about when it comes to training, who they should be looking at as sources of good information. And if people take things out of the podcast and it makes them a better lifter and makes them stronger, that's all I can ask for. So thanks a lot for taking the time to chat with me. 100% everyone listening, look at the work that Jason does and the Strength Guys do. It's I know it helps me as a coach, and it pushes me to put a little bit more detail into my coaching. So thanks a lot for taking the time to chat with me. Thanks a lot to everyone listening, and I will see you all next week.
Thank you, everyone.